So, dear guests, dear experts, welcome to our third event within our series, Belarus and Nervous System. The recent presidential elections in Belarus have triggered protests and massive and brutal crackdowns, as I guess we all heard of and we have all seen pictures of. So yeah, in the week after the elections, these extremely violent police actions have led to the largest countrywide, large-scale anti-Lukashenka demonstration in Belarus history, at least since its independence in 1991. So we gathered here today with so many people, so many great experts to think what's next, but also what happened. And I would like to introduce you now to our experts. Oleg Kozlovsky, he's working at Amnesty International as a researcher, who will give us an input statement, first of all, very soon. Then we will have actually our discussion split into parts. The first one focuses on the internal developments and dimension of the elections and the protests. And for that we have two experts also with us here today. Alena Aharelysheva, she's a sociologist and lecturer at ECLAB, which is the European the liberal arts college, European College of Liberal Arts in Belarus, in Minsk. And Elizabeth Kovtiak, she is a journalist and activist and researcher on reform processes and so on. And we have the second panel discussion with Katsiaryna Shmatsina. She is an analyst at the Belarus Institute for Strategic Studies in Minsk, and Jakob Wöllenstein, the country director of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, Konrad-Adenauer Foundation in Belarus. And they will focus on the foreign dimension of the elections and the protests. This event today will be hosted by an analyst from the Center for Liberal Modernity. Before I will hand over the digital floor to Mattia, I would just like to remind you to make use of your video and speaking rights that you all have, as you can see already, as responsible as possible. We want to create this discussion quite interactively. So of course you can always turn off and on your microphone and the video at any time. However, we would kindly like to ask you to wait to make use of your microphone until we've reached the open discussion round later on. You can just quickly say your name or raise your analog or digital hand. I guess with so many people, it's better to use the digital hand. Or write your name or question in the chat if you have a question. So yes, this is it from my side. Thanks to all our guests and experts. In case you have any question in between, feel free to text us in the chat. So now, Mattia, to you.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you for the introduction also of the speakers and also for framing today's debate. So Dobra večer to friends and those who watch from outside of Germany and especially Belarus. These are troublesome times, so we appreciate it a lot that experts and analysts made it and participate today from Belarus. So Mona already raised some of the most important questions, but I think everyone is glued to Telegram, to WhatsApp, to Twitter, and to the news, and following very closely to what's happening. So it's kind of easy, though, to lose track of the fast changing developments. So we want to today make sense of what has happened and ask kind of what's next. So kind of, can the protest movement keep up the momentum and possibly bring down this regime? And how does the regime continue to handle this popular revolt? Does it really give in, or does it use more violence? And what has been the EU's reaction? Was it strong enough? Is the West united when it comes to Belarus? And what is Russia doing? And how is that position changing as we speak? So as Mona was saying, feel free to use the question and answer section while we are on the virtual panel. I will include your comments and questions already during that time. And as Mona was saying, you will get the opportunity to raise your questions or comments after we had a couple of rounds. So Mona already introduced Oleg. I just want to add that Oleg, you were in Belarus prior and after the elections. And as Mona was saying, we saw brutal violence or levels of police violence. So we decided to, as this was the main trigger for this unrest and this what seems could be a revolution, why don't you put into perspective the scale of the violence, and also how does it compare to what you've seen in Belarus and Russia in the post-Soviet space in terms of human rights abuses before? Oleg, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I have my main field of expertise is Russia, and in the past several years I've been only paying so much attention to Belarus, wasn't really following it closely. But about 10 to 15 years ago, I've been visiting Belarus several times a year, and I attended several of its presidential elections in 2006, then in 2010, which were both followed by mass protests and by crackdowns. So in a way, what's happening in Belarus may look like a repetition of what I've seen before, but there are some very significant differences. One, it was obvious the moment I arrived in Belarus on Sunday, 9th of August, the election day, was how far dissatisfaction with the present regime is, how massive it is. So before that, usually you had probably 20 to 30% of people who were actively interested in politics, who would attend protests, who would go and vote, usually against Lukashenka, and the rest were just more or less indifferent. Lukashenko had his own base of support, but the majority of people just didn't think politics was anything they should care about. Now you see that every third person you see in Minsk, it was on the election day, was wearing the white armband. Cars were honking all the time whenever they saw something that looked like a protest, maybe somebody raising their hand or something. So it was a very different picture. Everybody was both against the regime and also very much mobilized. So this was difference number one. Lukashenko's popularity appears to have really fallen very, very low compared to previous years. So it looks, it's impossible, I think, to know the actual results of the election, because they were so falsified that there is nothing to, there is no way to take back the actual figures. But I would be really surprised to know that, for instance, Tikhanovskaya didn't make it, didn't win in the first round. At least in Minsk, it appears that every person you meet is against Lukashenko. The second thing was how peaceful the protesters were. In Russia, like in Belarus, we don't have the pictures you often see in Germany, in the United States, in France, and elsewhere, when protests are oftentimes accompanied with some groups, oftentimes minorities, in these protests, who use violence against the police, against property, who break press windows or attack police, etc. We're not used to that picture for a variety of historical, maybe psychological and social reasons. But in Belarus, people were even more peaceful than what I used to see in Russia, in Moscow. So in the 3 days that I was there, and I tried to attend every protest, to be at the hottest spots in Minsk. I saw zero cases when somebody would use violence or even try to be aggressive against riot police. When people saw riot police advance, they would just disperse and try not to get involved in any kind of clashes. To be sure, there were several cases when people built barricades. There were, I think, like 2 or 3 Molotov cocktails thrown at one spot on one night. But compared to the size of the protests, you can safely say that 99% of people who were there were absolutely peaceful. They even didn't cross the street on red traffic light in most cases, which is, it may even look absurd because they are trying to have a revolution, and they are playing by all the rules, including the traffic rules. But it's what protest in Belarus looks like. And it is even more shocking how the police reacted. So on the first night, before any barricades, before a single Molotov cocktail, before any sort of violence, whatever it could be, from the onset of the protest, we saw and heard the stun grenades being thrown into the crowd. We saw rubber bullets being fired into the crowd, which was just standing there and chanting some slogans, nothing else. We saw riot police charge into the crowd and grabbing people who they could catch and beating them with police batons. There was absolutely no explanation, not just this justification. Sometimes police do use excessive force, but you can at least understand it psychologically. They are scared, they are pumped up from the adrenaline. But in that case, it was just ordinary people standing there, and for some reason they were attacked in this vicious way. And it repeated for the next several evenings. On one night, as you probably know, a person was killed. We now saw this video. He was just shot dead in front of some journalists, in front of the police. He was alone, holding nothing, no guns or anything. We then visited that location. We found lots of ammunition, lots of cartridges like this one, this Russian-made cartridge from rubber bullets that were everywhere on that square. We saw Kalashnikov blank cartridges, etc., etc. As I think you also know, a few days after that, an even more sinister part of these events began to be known, when people began to be discharged from places of detention. We learned of the level of torture that they were subjected to, which is just horrible, which is something that was probably unseen for generations in this part of the world, which can only be compared to what happens during wartime, during genocide, or things like that, right? It's not something you can expect even from an abusive police force to do. And I think this, all of this has really shocked the nation, probably even including some people aligned with the authorities. And beginning on Wednesday, actually we left Belarus on Wednesday, and when we were leaving, things looked very bleak. We saw this level of repression, we saw this level of police violence, and we didn't see any light ahead. It looked like people would be oppressed and pushed into complete obedience, but instead people remained persistent, they remained, their bravery is something I admire, how they behaved in the face of this repression. And the government, the regime began to backtrack. They started letting people out. Today they said that they are about to release everybody who still remains, 122 people who still remain in jails. There were no more such massive crackdowns, although arrests continue to this day. And now it looks like the regime's days are numbered, and we at Amnesty, at least I will open a little secret that even on Friday we decided that, okay, probably doesn't make sense to talk to this regime anymore, not because we support one politician against another, but because we don't think this regime will last. We should be preparing to work with whoever comes in its place. So I hope and I expect that it is within days that regime will change, and hopefully it will also mean a change to the better for Belarusians.
Thank you, Oleg. I think these are extremely important observations, and even your sharp analysis. We can only hope that you are right. I think this is very important to understand the popular anger that we will now talk about. So I want to now start the first block on kind of domestic developments, and I want to begin with you, Elisa Kovtyak. You are in Minsk, and as Mona was briefly saying, you are a researcher in the fields of activism. So why don't you share, first of all, your observations of this past weekend, which marked the tipping point of the protest. We saw, as everyone was saying so far, the largest ever protest in Belarus history. So why don't you make sense of these events and kind of explain us what has happened since Saturday to today?
Well, firstly, I'm more focusing on art activism, and I think my this short speech would be more focused on how art had, I would say, because what Oleg was saying, that at some moment it was very depressive point at which everyone thought that, okay, we're not winning because no one is ready to actually kill the police or something, because we are actually almost everyone is against violent protests. And what I think that changed the course and the how things are going is this, I think you've heard about this women in white protests. And it was an idea which was started very grassroots. Someone just created a chat and women started to invite each other, like all the girls, you know, from the phone book, just add to this Telegram chat, because only Telegram is stably working now. And I think that was very interesting, very moving, and very disarming for the violent police and for the Lukashenko himself action. And I would actually say that this is very, very close to merging with art activism, because it's not simply a protest that, okay, we are women. It was very moving image, and then more and more females started to join it than other days. And perhaps, you know, that we were bringing also flowers. So it would be very, you know, this damsel in distress archetype. And that's what we were trying to show. And also for Lukashenko and his allies who are extremely sexist, this idea that, okay, we cannot beat women because it would spoil the image of, you know, this strong male president who is trying to put down the young female standing in white in these dresses with flowers. So I would say that it was one of the moving points, because after this, other people started to join. I mean, older generation, then there were, and also meanwhile, also perhaps it's a lot of factors, but meanwhile, the factories and big enterprises started to join the strike. And I think if we're not talking about some shift inside of an elite circle who is around Lukashenko, that if it wouldn't be shift between them, I think the strikes is the only, because all these protests, as they're truly peaceful, they have only power to persuade people. And I would say that from the very beginning of the wave of protests, which basically started in the mid-June, art was always like playing quite a great role, and I would connect it to the, if someone remembers, because now in August it seems completely irrelevant, although it was quite recent, that the most popular presidential candidate, Viktor Babarika, who is now arrested and he's in KGB jail with his son, who was running his election team. And he had he initiated the collection, and one of the greatest pieces was Eva by Chaim Sutin. He was French, Jewish, Belarusian painter, and Eva became basically at that point in early summer, it became a symbol of protest, and this also with the female face, and what we are seeing now, it has a huge gender aspect to it. And then continued, and I think it was 2 days ago when the artist had wanted to not only to show and inspire people, like was the action with the women in white or with Eva, but also to show what actually the police is doing. They had a protest called the Art of Regime, and they were showing all the pictures and also drawing and inviting people also to collaborate and leave their posters with their slogans and what they can draw or add to this happening and installation, which is still there. I think at least it was there. And so I would say that it was quite, I mean, the artistic aspect for the activist movement now is quite strong. And there are also, like, if we're talking about this women in white protests, now there is a challenge between artists. There are more than 500 participants already, and they're all drawing females standing in white and with their arms stretched, like they're holding hands. And it also gone viral, and also the artists from other countries are joining. And I would say that it emphasizes and reminds all the time that it's a peaceful protest. We are not, today Lukashenko told that we need to kill him, otherwise he wouldn't give up his power. But still, like, we are trying to persuade people who are in these elite circles and each other who are not yet into the politics with quite moving and innocent images. And I think for Belarus it was, everyone yesterday was quite euphoric, and people who are not artists, they're also doing some sort of collages and slogans which are very creative. And it feels that as even those who were not in the politics before, they were quite oppressed. They were not aware that they're oppressed, but still this fear to do something wrong or to touch the borders of censorship in this country, it was always present. And now it feels like this oppression is gone, at least inside of people's minds. And that's why this wave of protests went further and it became more peaceful. And it feels like, of course, everyone fears that Lukashenko would do something extremely violent and shooting people to death just on the streets or something, because he can do it actually. But everyone hopes that it's not just something which would happen in Europe in the 21st century, even with Lukashenko, but still, no one is completely sure. And for everyone is swinging between being euphoric and being fearful, but these creative powers, which are now just blooming, it helps people keep going. And now we're seeing that all the theaters, Philharmonia or Opera House, I think also they joined the protest, the strike, and also the television now. So it goes in all this, what supports the regime, not directly, but still they're also like leaving their places, those who are state employees and who were always obliged to follow Lukashenko's reign and his ideas. So I think that that was the clicking power, because when I was invited to take part in this women in white protest, I'm not sure if now so many things are going on, we have so many, and I was very unsure if it would work. But after it was 200 people on the first day, it was a few thousand on the next days. and then went further. So I would say that that's a very interesting time for Belarus. And also what we should not, it's not connected to what I was talking about directly, but still, although we feel like, okay, it's going to a better side, we still don't know what's coming. And we have 80 people who are missing, and probably they're dead. And it's quite probable because there was information about dead people in the first 2 days, but it wasn't confirmed. And now we're missing 80 people. So I hope I'm wrong, but still it's very, on the side of protest, it's a very bright and inspiring processes which are coming, but what's happening still on the side of Lukashenko's allies are quite, it's all quite doom and fearful. And so we're like trying to find, not to find the balance, but to switch the balance to the positive side. And so that's perhaps what I would like to say about this switch and how it actually managed to change. Because also, I wouldn't say that it's that often in this sort of a revolutionary protest that after this doom, because no one had this like doom point of people being murdered and beaten in the very beginning, and so the revolution continued. But here we started with a very dark moment, and then we're trying to unfold it, and that's at least how I see it.
Right. I mean, there were several waves of violence also on the Maidan in Ukraine, but we will not go into the comparison of Ukraine and Belarus.
Of course it was happening, but it wasn't happening like on the first day. That's what I'm telling. It wasn't the starting point for them. Of course.
Right. I think Ukrainians would still disagree with that on the trigger of the revolution being the students being beaten up. But nevertheless, we focus on Belarus today. So I want to bring in briefly Jakob before I turn to Alena. Kind of, why don't you bring us up to space, or what? Because a lot of people saw mass protests on the weekend. But kind of, how would you put this into perspective, and what has happened since our event today? A brief, rough, and very analytic approach to what we've witnessed this weekend and until today.
What has happened since our event today?
No, it's until our event. I'm sorry. Just to bring, a lot of people couldn't follow the events as closely as we did. So kind of what are the most important events on this weekend, and also today? We saw several.
Right. So first of all, also thank you and welcome from my side. Before going into this, I wanted to make 3 short remarks and comments on what happened. And first of all, underline what Elizabeth just said, that 80 people are missing. I mean, we saw it was 2 people that were confirmed dead, what I saw today. And one of them firstly being claimed by the government to be killed by his own explosive. That was his fault. And now it seems very much like he was shot from a close distance. And a second person dying in custody because of a heart problem. But today I saw that apparently it's 5 confirmed deaths and 80 people missing, and a lot of reports that they died in torture and were just hidden by the regime in order not to spark more violence. It's not confirmed, but where are they out of these hundreds? And this is horrible. And I mean, we've been seeing these very inspiring pictures and of hundreds of thousands taking to the street and being so extremely peaceful. What we saw, that they didn't cross red lights. There was pictures on Telegram that they cleaned up their rubbish, that before standing on a bench they would take off their shoes. I mean, it seems ridiculous. I've lived in Berlin for a few years, and then you take off your shoes to protest the bloody violence of police. But still, what I hear from, I mean, I'm in Vilnius now, I'm not in Belarus, but I talk to people. And what I hear is that despite many peaceful many peaceful protesters, also other people are extremely angry. What I can very well understand, and that especially before this, these 2 marches that took place yesterday, when nobody knew was it going to be a confrontation between them. I mean, you might have seen there was a demonstration that was organized by the regime in the center on the central square in Minsk. And Lukashenko was given a speech, and people apparently were urged to come there from all over the country. There were buses and buses, and people that were apparently threatened in many circumstances to come to Minsk, and also civilians, police officers dressed in civil clothing. And there was about 10,000, and nobody knew, are they going to march on this other demonstration, this anti-regime demonstration? Will it come to clash and provocations? This has been going on over the whole week. every single day you read, oh, there will be provocations, don't go to the streets. And it seems it's all fake news to stop people from coming out. But I spoke to a friend before that day, and he said many people are so angry at the regime and about these torture reports, and it's really horrible things about rapes, and you don't even want to talk about it, that if it came to a clash, this could really spark also quickly. So yes, and just one last remark about the question of symbols, and this is why I think it's so great to have somebody who does arts activism, because I think symbolism and arts have played a huge role in this whole process. Since Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has now taken upon herself this role of being a leader, but so far she has been a symbol, and a very strong symbol. I mean, you saw these three ladies with their symbols of the heart and the victory and the fist. I mean, this is art. And this complete anti-picture to Lukashenko, three young women that stand for the broad society, high society, a cultural manager, and a housewife who is a teacher, and they together give a female young face to the protest. I mean, this was very much about symbolism. This is what people apparently needed to come out and unite. So yeah, just briefly summarizing what has been happening over the last days. I mean, it's also very difficult to keep track for us since there's so much fake news floating. And so far, the state media were painting the complete anti-picture. As of yesterday, there's people from the state media part of the protest, of the strike, and now they're showing the truth on television, partly at least. But it came down after this massive crackdown to a point when a very bright analyst from Belarus told me, when I asked him, how do you see the prospects on a scale from 1 to 10? And he said, it's -10. It's over, we're done for. And then everything came back, and the people showed that it does not take this united vision to bring people together, but this feeling of ownership that this country is yours and is not going to be left to the person who thinks he owns it. This was Lukashenko's narrative, that the country is his personal property and he's not going to give it away. And that this is really, I mean, a revolution that comes from the broad society, which is why it seems so disorganized, which gives it strength of being fluid like water. This was the term that Nectar, for example, used, be like water. But without having this one strong face, being the leader, it's a very different scenario than, for example, in Ukraine 6 years ago. This analogy has been drawn so often because there you had a strong opposition and organized unions and so on. And in Belarus, this is all forming very organically at the moment. But Tikhanovskaya has now is trying now, having accepted this role as a leader, to bring structure into this. She has called upon the formation of a national council where everybody can apply, celebrities, businessmen, and so on, to have a representation of this side of the protesters, the demonstration, the people, however you want to call this. Because if you want to get to this point of a round table, this has been an idea, get people who are willing to negotiate from the government side. Lukashenko is not, but everybody who is willing to negotiate, who are they going to talk to? And to have a broad representation within this circle. So from having gone down to this -10 estimate, when these strikes got momentum and the first big state enterprises started joining them, it became ever more clear that people are not going to accept this. And well, demonstrations sparking all over the country. And today, maybe the last, because you also asked about this, the last events today, domestically, Lukashenko, after having had the staged demonstration yesterday, that, by the way, people were afraid, are they going to clash? And after Lukashenko's speech, they went for a rally, these pro-Lukashenko demonstrators, and some of them just apparently took the train home and the buses, and the rest disappeared. I heard that they were walking towards the other demonstration, and then they were gone. Maybe they just switched sides. I mean, for a police officer, if he wears civilian clothing, changing sides is much easier than if you're in a uniform. Well, all these worries were not proven. And today, Lukashenko visited a big production site for heavy machinery with a staged audience, partly also security forces in civilian clothing and people from the factory workers. And he gave a speech, and they booed him away. And he flew out with his helicopter.
Thank you, Jakob. We'll come back to the external dimension, but now I want to bring in Alena. Your focus is gender, and gender has already been touched upon. But why don't you share your observations? You've been on the streets in the past days, and your internet also collapsed right before our event. Luckily, it came back. But why don't we heard about the importance of art activism? But why don't you briefly draw upon whether there's anything to add to the gender aspect, or share your perspective on the ongoing protests, what's happening on the ground? Seems that you are muted.
Yeah, so hi everyone, thank you for inviting me. And my colleagues talked about the Tikhanovskaya image and the woman in white protest, but I just want to summarize some of the what was mentioned before, and also go in quite retrospective analysis. And for a long time, woman wasn't identified as a power and as a subject in a protest. So from like if we look at to the protest in 2010 or in 2006, what was after the president election, that was kind of idea that woman, that was an idea that we as a Belarusian nation need a strong man who have to fight for our freedom, and woman has to just sit at home with the children and wait for this freedom, and that's it. And as you see today, the situation is completely changed, and I guess for the first time since 1917, that was 100 years ago, before the Soviet Revolution, we had really huge female protests, and this protest really identified as a female protest, not just a protest. And again, before the kind of the work what you have to do during the protest was divided like a female and male job, and female job was mostly invisible job like creating flags or supporting your fathers and supporting your husbands during the in the prison and something like that. But now again the situation has changed, and I think mostly because these women, I mean the partners of the men, now they have their own voice and their own image, like Tikhanovskaya, and we all see the evolution of Tikhanovskaya image from the unknown woman, which was identified by the SME like wife of Tikhanovsky. We even don't know her name because we don't need this name. And after the couple of months, she became the leader of the nation. And now she, like today, according to her her message, she's ready to be this leader of the nation. And again, coming back to yesterday protest, you can see lots of slogans with Tikhanovskaya, like "We are ready, Tikhanovskaya, our president," but only the few which is mentioned her husband. So now she is even more popular than her husband. That is also the symbol. And I think this incredible image of three women, which is joined together to support each other, that was also quite impressive for lots of the citizens, but also for female citizens. And I think as a result of this inspiration, we will see this female protest, which woman in white protest. And that also create how they use their weakness as a power. And also the main idea of this protest, we want to support and protect our men, because now it's not safe for men to go to the streets. So we, as a weak woman, are ready to support them. And it's also incredible for such a patriarchal country as Belarus right now. And again, thinking about is it a feminist movement or not? I can say that it's a feminist movement. It's mostly I think it's female empowerment for sure, because they still use quite patriarchy slogans as "we are the wife," "we are the daughters," and something like this. But for the first time of independent Belarusian history, we see the development of female citizens. So women thinking about what it is to be a female as a citizen, how it looks like. And again, it's, and I think because we are experiencing these symbols and this right now, maybe that's something like a background of our local feminism in the future. Even now, for example, again, the last news that Tikhanovskaya creating a coordination council from the people who are ready to help her with this in this transparency period, and already 35 people in this council, but only 9 women. And now there are lots of, and it's again started this council criticized by civil society. Why only 1 woman? We need more women in this council, because we already has this idea that women are not just big partner anymore. Even tomorrow, I guess we all see the pictures with the huge flags. But what is interesting again, that not only men keeping these flags, women also keeping these flags. And when a man asked like, "Oh, you're a weak woman, can I help you?" It's not a question anymore, because women show for the whole society that we are not an object anymore. We can stand for themselves and for our freedom as well as a man can do.
Thank you, Alena. I think that was very valuable, and I want to now turn to Kate and ask you about, we've seen strikes, and this is one of the turning points so far, workers joining the protests, Kate, but kind of the crucial question burning underneath everyone's brain here is like, what's next? So kind of we saw the strikes I mentioned, certain small level defections of individual police officers, we saw army officers protesting as well, but how would you assess the strength of the regime, Kate? How would you assess today at the evening, how strong is the regime, and what do you think it will do looking forward?
Hello, happy to join the discussion, and I also want to warn about some strange noise and music coming from the street, and I cannot do anything with this. And also, I'm not currently in Belarus, so that's this noise and like music and celebration has nothing to do with like developments in Belarus. And so, as you've mentioned, those strikes and the rise of the protest moods and the more people and groups are joining in, this indeed is a historical momentum among the Belarusians, and this momentum of the like civil uprising should be used. But this is complicated by the fact that there is no clear leader at the moment who would chair this movement, and maybe for the good at the moment, just because based on the recent history in Belarus, 2006-2010, when there were leaders leading the crowds on the squares to protest, they were very quickly detained, beaten, put in KGB prison, etc., and the movement was left leaderless. And I would say that at the moment, this is rather an asset for the Belarusian uprising than the other way around. But at the same time, those protests cannot just continue. People won't just keep walking on the streets every day indefinitely. Someone needs to take charge and to lead, to aggregate those moods and lead them somewhere. And in that regard, I think it's very, it gives us hope that the recent statements by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, where she claimed that she can be, she can take charge and become a national leader. And then within the few recent days, we've heard about the National Council bill formed, and the different societal groups and political figures and influencers are now coordinating who could be part of this council on behalf of what organizations. So I would assume that at some point in the nearest future, we would see some sort of united voice on behalf of the opposition and broader society, those who would potentially try to bring the government to the discussion, to some sort of negotiations, but maybe Lukashenko, but we will see like if he would join the discussion at some point.
Can I jump in there with a specific follow-up? There's talk in Germany about this roundtable example from Poland and previous. Is that something that is discussed in Belarus, or is it something that you see as an example, roundtables between the regime and protesters?
I would say it's too premature to say anything because that's just at the planning stage. So I wouldn't necessarily draw those parallels. Also, you were talking about those strikes and the signs that the regime is, like from what I at least can conclude, that the regime is showing the signs of weaknesses and that it is not that unshakable as it seemed for years, when even the representatives of the state agencies or even the propaganda TV, some of them would speak up and join the side of the protesters. Those are like the few like news which were particularly touching for me today was the 2 MFA employees who were speaking in front of the premises holding white sheets of paper, and they not only said that they would most likely lose their jobs, and they understand that they just stand up against the whole like machinery of the state with this discontent, but they also the guy who was speaking, he said like, please watch out for what happens to me next. I really hope that like I'm not sure if I'm safe anymore after making those statements. But at the same time, I would say that the level of social discontent in the uprising is unprecedented, and also one could never expect that even this unshakable state system, the propaganda, some workers from the SOE enterprises, or even some representatives of the like technocrats inside the system would signal that they are somehow looking to the protester side, where like if I'm not mistaken, there was Rumas and his wife yesterday who made a picture in front of the protest and saying something like, "Oh, what an exciting picture! Like we're just like chilling and enjoying this vibe of like protest moods." But I want to underline that Lukashenko, and this is based on like he's not willing or considering to leave anytime soon and to give up easily. And essentially, he doesn't have many options other than to cling to power, in his understanding, like him, his family, and his closest supporters / elites. That if he steps down, there is very little chance he would leave without possible further prosecution for everything that was happening in terms of like violations and crimes and other like violations in Belarus for 26 years. And at least like my perception before the elections was that Lukashenko was considering to leave, but at a later date. This could be like tracked in his statements within past years, when he was saying that you don't want to give this constitution and the country with so many powers to the new guy.
В душе. Пошла я в душ, да?
Please let me reform the constitution and to restore the checks and balances, and then like I'm not eternal, I will leave. But apparently he miscalculated that these elections would hit the new low, incredible low in his ranking of support, and now he's like simply like clinging to power and in the survival mode. And one last comment that I want to bring out, that we should not be charmed by those moves by presidential like administration and law enforcement agencies who say that, okay, we are releasing prisoners. We've all seen in what conditions they were released. I mean, they're not even like prisoners, they were just detained the streets. There was no proper court deliberation or anything. And I would say that right now they're just faced in some sort of fundamental challenge they've never seen before, and they are merely regrouping before some further moves.
Right. I see the first people raising their hands, and we'll come to Marie-Louise Beck, who's one of the first in a second. But we haven't talked about two components, which we briefly should do before we open the floor, which is the Russia factor and the EU, which is extremely crucial. So, Jakob, why don't you lay out briefly what the EU has done already? Foreign ministers met last Friday, but how would you assess that comparing to previous sanctions regimes that we had with Belarus, and then the upcoming Council Summit tomorrow? So what is the EU doing, and is it enough? Please.
Well, the point is that we're in the very middle of a process of which we don't know yet where it's going to end up. So comparing what is happening at the moment to what happened 10 years ago, where we have the full picture, is never going to be accurate to the very, very last point. But you remember that, of those who don't remember, 10 years ago, when the protests were cracked down upon after the elections, which is already different this time because the violence started much earlier. The EU introduced personal sanctions against Lukashenko and 156 people from the authorities. They froze assets. Poland and Sweden even lobbied for having big economic sanctions. That was not adopted, but the US, for example, also had financial sanctions at the time. And it was clear when the violence was rising, even before the elections, that many people in the EU were already saying the response to this cannot be less than it was 10 years ago. Despite many experts and analysts that we also talked to in our seminars from Belarus and from Russia said it's not likely the EU will definitely choose having stability and geopolitical considerations over these things, because sanctions don't ever work. And so what we've seen from the EU was the response that there were single statements from EU officials and from people from the member states that called for sanctions very early. That was on the agenda quite quickly after the election night and that first outburst of violence. But what has been decided last week was again to have personal sanctions first and foremost. We don't see the full list now, but the talk is to have it extended not only to the top officials, but to those that were responsible for falsifying the results and for the violent crackdown. There was, I think it was Sikorsky from Poland, from the European Parliament now, who strongly said we need to have an investigation into these crimes, international investigation, and make sure that these sanctions hit those that are responsible. Although the reaction to this from, for example, Maria Kolesnikova, the only remaining one of these three faces in Belarus, was pretty skeptical about sanctions. I don't know whether this is due to the fact that she is in the country and doesn't want to risk taking sides which would be seen against her country. But obviously the question is, focusing on sanctions alone is definitely not going to be enough. And even 2010, those personal sanctions were seen in the package with having brought, for example, scholarship programs and visa facilitations from Poland at the time. But I think it's extremely important now to not only focus on sanctions. Sanctions are important, first of all, as a symbol, I would say, to say we don't have a huge set of foreign policy tools that we can use. I mean, we're not going to wage war, but what we will have then, it's sanctions, it's freezing assets, and so this being considered now, I think it's important, but it can only be part of the package, which has to be much broader. One question is, and so this was supported by Germany also. Angela Merkel put her support behind this after Foreign Minister Maas, for example, had been outspoken about this early, and so it was adopted. But the question is, for example, do we recognize Lukashenko as a president now? There was this appeal from Veronika Tsepkalo very early to the world not to recognize him. And today the European Parliament has accepted a resolution with a big majority, 570 people out of 705, not to recognize the election results, to declare Lukashenko a persona non grata. I'm based in Lithuania, and the Lithuanians have taken a leadership role in this process. President Nausėda also saying we can't possibly recognize him as a legitimate representative of Belarus. The question being, does this apply as of now? Because technically, and the opposition has been going this way of being very close to always respecting Belarusian law, so the legalism. Legally speaking, Lukashenko is still president because of the last election of 2015, and that only expires on, I think, the 10th of September, when he has to be re-inaugurated. So is it only from then, or has he delegitimized himself completely already now, legally speaking, or is it just politically because of all the violence? So the question is, how do we bring together these sticks and carrots, if you wish, of having sanctions, yes, but from the very first point, saying how can we help, how can we support, and where is the line between supporting and interfering? Because this is something very important also to bear in mind. This is something which the Belarusians wanted and did, this choice, and if we can be of support, that's important. But having this in our minds, it's their choice and it's their life. Although I hear strong calls from people in Belarus saying you should raise sanctions as much as you can, have a boycott on oil imports, have a boycott on any state enterprise, and people here say, okay, calm down, this would be interference in domestic affairs, well, which is always a political decision also. But for example, can there be economic support? And in what way? Same, if we can come to a solution of the immediate situation, how do we see the long-term perspective of the cooperation? For example, Andris Kubilius, the former prime minister of Lithuania, who is now very active in the European Parliament, says if you compare what the European Union gave in support to Ukraine after 2014, this would be now in comparison to Belarus, would be at least 4 billion euros as a support program to make sure they can find a way to overcome all these economic problems, which they would also have if Lukashenko is gone. Very briefly, I think the question now is, can we offer our assistance and mediation? There was this offer from the Baltic states and Poland to have this roundtable. Lukashenko clearly refused this. He's not going to be part of any negotiation solution. He said today, shoot me is the only way. And if there is a negotiation solution of a roundtable and international support for the whole process as of now, Lukashenko would have to get out of the equation somewhere, and I think only Russia can do this, give him asylum if they want to, if he does not stay until the very end. And then can there be an OSCE solution that both the West and the Russia are present at the same table now to make sure what happens next is in the interest of the Belarusian people, first and foremost, but does not contradict the interests of the neighbors, so everybody can be happy with the solution. And can we then assist the next elections, have observers from the West and Russia stand in every single polling station to make sure we are both on the same page that this is a legitimate process. That would be, maybe it's naive to think that we can come together with this, but if we can find a way, and I think there's an interest to solve this, for Russia not to have another problem in his neighborhood, and for Putin to present himself as someone who can bring solutions, that could even inspire other problems in the region.
All right, we have reached the point where I will open up now. We have not yet talked thoroughly or properly enough about the Russia factor, but we will, I'm sure, in the discussion there's something. And Marie-Louise Beck was among the first to raise the question. So please, you have the floor. You need to unmute yourself, and then the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me? Well, hello everybody. I love to look at your young faces. I'm a little older, like you can see, and we've gone through that 15 years ago already, and in 2010 we always were present, and it's wonderful to see that there's a next generation coming up, handling it in a total different way than before, the old parties, and that maybe you are really a big step towards freedom and human rights. Number one is we definitely immediately need the list of names of those 76 or 78 people. And we immediately have to hand them on to the foreign ministry and to Angela Merkel, to the Chancellor's office, because this is, at the moment, I think every hour is important that we have the names and that the regime knows we are already searching for them. This is number one, I think, very, very important. And maybe Mattia, maybe Oleg, you have the names. I don't know who has the names, and hand it on to Mattia, and we will hand it on in a direct way to the Chancellor's office. Number two is course, everybody is on the phone, and we have been having an EP debate amongst friends of Belarus. The big difference than in Ukraine is that it is at the moment not a geopolitical and geostrategic fight. It is not the fight of the Belarusian people wanting to go west towards EU. And I think that is very important, because if Lukashenko manages to create the myth that the West already interfering and wants to pull that country on their side, this is going to be dangerous for all of you. It will help Kremlin to intervene in any way they want, hybrid or even militarily. And Putin can live with a weak Lukashenko. For Putin, this is no problem at all to have a weak Lukashenko. So I think all ideas which we try to develop from the West, how to be at your side without making mistakes and making things work worse than better, have to be led by this idea. Don't make a East-West debate out of it. And that is why I think if you talk about the next step, which would have to be fair and free election, those are always being obeyed by the OSCE. It is, and the OSCE is not a Western institution. It is an institution of, including Russia and other states, which we might not like too much, but they are part of it. So it must be this OSCE and the Blue Book, which must be the rules for the upcoming next elections. I think this is what is very important, and let's keep out the West-East question. I even think many Belarusian people don't have that in mind at the moment, but they have in mind that they want freedom and they want their people back and they want to have the right to speak out.
Thank you. Very important intervention there. There is, now I will go through some of the questions, try to connect them. There's a question by Tony van der Togt. Maybe that's for Kate. He's asking whether there's any chance of a Russian humanitarian intervention bringing an alternative to power. So basically Russia playing a positive role into bringing Lukashenko down. So Kate, why don't you pick that question up?
So I would connect this more broadly to the concerns around Russia's intervention. I would say that for Russia, one thing we can be sure about is that Russia is closely watching the developments in Belarus, and one of their core interests in the current Kremlin leadership is to keep Belarus in its orbit as much as possible. But I don't think that the clear intervention or any bold moves at the moment would happen, or they're like, that's not the most likely option at the moment. At the very least, like, there is not so much, these events are unraveling so quickly. Maybe Russia is just like calculating their options. I think that for Russia now to intervene in one way or another would bring a risk of bringing down Russia's international image. And at the moment, what would be more rational on their side to use some legal, or like to seize this opportunity towards weak Belarusian leadership in any case, but to use more covert techniques, using the Belarusian vulnerable economy, which is dependent on access to Russia's markets, access to Russia's loans, or to push further with union state integration, or maybe even like use this issue that with the nuclear power plant, which has been built on the Russia's money, and one of the blocks or like units was, as far as I know, launched recently. So I would assume that Russia is likely to use some more covert techniques. But at the same time, when we talk about Russia in Belarus, you can read quite a lot of pieces of analysis all over the, let's say, Western think tanks and news outlets, which talk about pros and cons and probabilities of intervention, etc. And I talked to a few diplomats of the neighboring country who are considering and are concerned about possible threats. So I won't bring up those points and calculations, but I would just want to bring up that I do not share these split in the opinions in the Belarusian expert society, or in general, like in Belarusian society, where those who talk about Russian threat are called radicals and alarmists who just talk about unrealistic scenarios. I would say that that's maybe not the first, like the not top choice on Russia's agenda at the moment, but there is not a zero probability either in terms of some kind of Russia's offensive.
Right, there are several more questions. I encourage you, if you want to raise, like Marie-Louise Beck has a comment or a question in person, just raise your digital hands. Otherwise, we will just go through the chat and try to make sense of your comments and questions. So there's another question, and then we'll kind of wrap up the external part. There's another question whether Russia will try to delegitimize the protest as Western and external driven. If anyone, Kate or anyone other of the panelists wants to comment and pick up on that, kind of how do you see the danger of the activists and protesters being delegitimized by Russia as outside forces? That's a question I see here. Yeah, Jakob is raising his hand. Please, Jakob, briefly.
Thank you. So it's already happening in a way that the state media in Russia, from what I have seen and read, has been portraying this as a color revolution and saying that it's being steered by Poland and Lithuania. I mean, it seemed to me, is more of an omission than openly lying, because you see when the president-elect Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is in Lithuania. It's not the Lithuanians, but it's happening from Lithuania. And Mechta, this very important Telegram channel, operates from Warsaw. So it's not the Poles, but it's Belarusians, from everything that is known, working from Poland. So it's omitting rather than completely coming up with the counter narrative. I think the problem is for Putin that, I think I see three strategic goals. One being Belarus not to drift west towards the NATO, and we've heard that this is not the case. I mean, Ukraine had a political guarantee for a future membership since 2008, and when 2014 happened, that was on the, oh yes, how strong was it? But it was on the agenda, and it's not on the agenda for Belarus, so this is not really much the concern. Secondly, Putin wants to maintain his big structural influence in Belarus, and I don't see an alternative for this in the short run. And the third thing is he does not want to have a successful democratic transformation in the immediate neighborhood. And I think if he went in militarily now, stabilizing Lukashenko, he would not only lose the Belarusians, like he lost the Ukrainians as friends, but he would also have a lot of opposition within his own country, because people are now, from what I see, very much coming out in solidarity in Russia. You know that in the Far East, in Khabarovsk, people have been protesting the government in Moscow, and they are now using Belarusian flags. So if Putin comes in and smashes the Belarusians, he will have a problem at home. But the problem is that he does not have a clearly established pro-Russian alternative. I think this is the question. So I would expect that he would rather try to influence the processes, build up a new candidate when Russians have experience in how to mingle in free democratic elections. And then if it comes to reforms, I saw this question somewhere, will it come to neoliberal reforms? I think it would be in the interest of the Kremlin that Belarus has liberal reforms and sells all the enterprises, because then they can come in with their money and just buy them and even extend their structural influence. So I think Putin, and he has been proven to be smart, to exploit chances in his own way, he will very much look for a way to portray himself as the one who brings a solution to secure his soft power in Belarus. If he's the one, not because it's in a deadlock somewhat, Lukashenko has the military power still, but the protest movement has not canalized. If he comes in now, maybe that was the idea of the humanitarian intervention, say, okay, I will take on Lukashenko, you go to a dacha in Crimea, be happy, but leave your people alone, and we will negotiate a new solution. He would try to have his soft power and his reputation saved, and be the one who brings solutions that will also even split the West on the question, how do we assess Russia?
All right, there are several more questions on domestic affairs. We're jumping hands and forth a little bit, but Elisa or Alena, one of you wants to pick this up. There's a question here by Nikola Pantic. Is there really a majority in support of Tikhanovskaya or the democratic change? Or how large is this Lukashenka, the remnants of the Lukashenka regime? I mean, it's difficult to quantify, but how would you assess this, the balance of strength? This is a question here from the audience. So one of you who wants to pick up on that. Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, I can answer. Again, we unfortunately we don't have real sociological research about that. What we're having right now is just internet researches, what the popular websites like Online or Goodbye made through the audience, and after that they realize, at least according to the audience, the real supporters of Lukashenko, that's around 3% from the country, and after that this popular image of Sasha 3% is coming after that. And again, the Tikhanovskaya, I guess now the majority are supporting Tikhanovskaya, at least people who are striking right now. And as you know, it looks like the whole Belarus is striking right now. I mean, from the factories to the theaters and museums and women and people to the streets and etc. Right? They all are Tikhanovskaya supporters. And again, that just because the situation is happened right now. For Tikhanovskaya, because first of all, the supporters of her husband are ready to vote for her, and the second reason why she is so important, that just because her program, or it's better to say the joint program of Tikhanovskaya, Tsepkalo and Kolesnikova are to general, so they just present that we are stand for free elections, and Tikhanovskaya tell for herself that I am not a leader, I am just a technical candidate who are ready to take the power to somebody next. And this is this quite general program was quite successful to join as much people as possible around such a program. So that is why, yes, I think so. Lots of people now, and also I saw the questions is it how about the Tikhanovskaya now in Vilnius, and some people, but that's really minority of people told that she left the country, so that she's not a hero anymore, but it's just a minority of country. Majority of people understood that that was a pressure on her, and she really has no any way to leave the country, and there are still lots of supporters. You can see lots of slogans during the strikes that people will still believe and still told that we need Sveta, please Sveta, come back, you're our president, and something like this. And Elizabeth, I see you want to add something.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add up a smaller remark regarding the level of support, because of course I just seen a few slogans on the protests and the streets, and there are a lot of actually people who are just against Lukashenko or just like visiting these sorts of meetings. But if you remember the story with the white armband or white ribbon, it started as a way how we can actually calculate in a fair way the elections, and the observers on the election. So people were told, if you are voting for Tikhanovskaya, please help us to actually count you, because we cannot do it because the elections are neither transparent nor fair. So people were actually putting these white armbands, firstly and mainly on the day of elections. Now it's just a symbol that you're for the positive changes. But on the days of the election, only those who supported Tikhanovskaya were wearing it. And if to believe the observers' reports, there were around 70% of people who were coming, and also like using this Golos, the vote platform, and if to expand this data they managed to collect, and also to to analyze at this moment, because it takes a lot of time to analyze. So we could say that actually around 70% voted for her, and it's quite likely, because if all these workers from the factories are just raising their hands when they're asked like who voted for Tikhanovskaya, and like 98% of people like we did. So it's very likely if the male and working class supported her, so obviously the others could be also. And yes, I see another hand, so thank you.
Jakob, briefly, yeah.
Just very briefly, I think in April, there were still representative surveys that showed about 30% of support for Lukashenko, but this was before all of this, this clear alternative produced itself, and the president made all these mistakes before the elections, threatening violence, saying the country is his private possession. And now what happened after the elections, I think this has even further delegitimized. So I always said these 3%, that it's a dream to say 3%, it's a symbol, but now I would not be surprised if this was the actual result, because everything that he did now was showing brute violence, saying you have to kill me, I'm never going to go away. What do you make out of this? He used to be the father of the nation in his own depiction, and now, well, he's slaughtering. So this is definitely very, very down.
See some remarks in the chat. Do you have a space for about 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up? It's already long going. So if you have further questions, just shoot. Just if not, again, what's going to happen next? I want to look forward. We see general strikes happening, or strikes in major factories, and even in the state-owned television channels. So one of the panelists who wants to kind of make a guess as to how these strikes will continue. How strong is that? Is it really worth describing that as a general strike just yet? And is that really an efficient tool to bring down the system? Who wants to, who dares to pick up on that? Okay, you're all too shy. Oleg, please, you're still there. Sorry, Oleg, your floor is yours.
I'm very bad at economics, especially in Belarus. So I don't know if we can describe it as a general strike or not. I understand that it's a significant proportion of workers who are on strike, but it's probably not a majority at the moment. And many workers are afraid of losing their jobs, which can happen very easily, especially since most of the big enterprises are government owned. But you can see how the authorities reacted to these strikes, and it looked like the single most painful development for them of the last week. They easily, or at least eagerly, used OMON and used excessive force to disperse the peaceful protesters. But as soon as they saw that strikes are becoming more than just a slogan, the level of repression was immediately reduced. As far as I know, the workers are not arrested for striking. Some of them have been fired, but probably just a few of them. And where did Lukashenko go? His only public appearance, well, one was yesterday at this staged protest, and the other one was today at that factory, where he hoped that he would face his core supporters, but instead he found his enemies and apparently chopped him. So I think it is a very vulnerable spot for Belarusian authorities. And if I were watching just the main developments in Belarus, I would watch, in addition to protests, of course, the strikes and also defections from the members of the regime.
Very important, unless there's another remark, then we'll wrap it up with this question. Is regarding the kind of post-Lukashenka era, and it's a broad question, so please try to keep it narrow, answered shortly. It's a question about the scenarios of reforms, and I want to pack it together in the question of, does the anti-Lukashenka opposition in the form of Tikhanovskaya and others, do they really have a plan? Not just in economics, do they have a plan how to build a post-Lukashenka Belarus? Or is it just about re-elections, free and immediate, free and fair re-elections. Who wants to tackle this question? Yeah, Kate, please.
Yeah, so first, I wouldn't criticize the opposition for a very vague general agenda they were running with, just because we can all see how they were operating in such tough conditions where it is nearly impossible to express your discontent, let alone to win the elections. And I would say that participation in these elections is some sort of like suicide, or you need to be prepared for that. I don't know, like what would happen to you. And it is a legitimate question to ask, like, what are the actual propositions they're running with? I would say that first, it is a good issue that a number of alternative candidates, including Tikhanovskaya, but also a few less visible ones, they were bringing up the issue of reforms and reforming the inefficient state-owned enterprises and cutting down bureaucracy and conducting reforms. So the society in general understands the need for that. And I would say that people inside the system, including technocrats, also understand this need. And at the core, like, of why those structural reforms, which are long overdue, and other inefficient decisions were completed and like copy pasted by the system for years, was the lack of political will and the very core of Lukashenko's regime, which was very much economically reliant on Russia, and then giving a little bit of money to those like pensioners and the core electorate at and then making those inefficient moves such as maintaining inefficient enterprise SOEs, again, in part to control the workers, and they keep to those numbers of the state, like of the employers of the state sector, and having leverage over them. And so I think that there are enough energetic, highly motivated and qualified people, both in the current system, and I mean technocrats. There are enough people in the opposition, or sort of like among the alternative political forces, and the bunch of Belarusians who are highly qualified, residing abroad, who would seek this, who would use this opportunity if they get a chance to come to the sort of new Belarus with the free and open conditions of like operating democratic standards and open society standards, and then they would be happy to contribute their expertise.
Marvelous words to wrap it up from our panel. Before I give the floor back to Mona, just want to say that I've been watching and working on Ukraine in the past 5 to 6 years nearly, and this is the notion for the Belarusians among you. The real work will begin in the day one after Lukashenko has disappeared or stepped aside, whatever. And I see Johannes Ahlefeld citing Dmitry Trenin, that game over for Lukashenko. Let's see, whenever he leaves, the real struggle will be to create a new Belarusian state, civic state, without Lukashenko. So this is an immense struggle, and I hope we will continue speaking about Belarus, keeping Belarus on the agenda. And with that, enough from me, and thank you to the panelists. Mona, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mattia. Thank you very much to all our experts who spoke today, who gave their critical and reflected voices to these really important situation and developments that are taking place in Belarus right now. I can already say from Polis 180, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you also to the guests for posing your great questions. And I guess with a more, maybe even a bit more personal end to this evening, I want to give the floor lastly to Olga Drindova. She is the editor at Belarus Analysen and also a member of Polis 180, just for a short, yeah, maybe personal wrap up and input. And I think there she is. Great. Olga, I give the floor to you now. Thanks to everyone for joining us. And I can just say from Polis 180 side, but I'm also sure from Center for Liberal Modernity and Konrad-Adenauer Foundation Belarus, we will keep up with the events and information on Belarus, even though this for now was the last event of our event series. We will definitely continue to follow what is going on, and will continue to do the information work in Germany and abroad, as we can see here today with so many people being here. So Olga, the floor is yours. Thanks to everyone.
Hello, thank you. Well, I'm quite impressed by the number of our guests. I think this is the third webinar that we have in Belarus, and we've never had that much people. And thank you also for all your interest that comes from media and from all possible people that are just now watching what is happening in Belarus. I think my impression would be not that personal, because there are still quite a number of things I would like to add after I heard the discussion, which I think are extremely important to understand what is happening now, and to make a bit thoughts about what can happen in the upcoming weeks. And I'll try to be short and to manage it within a few minutes. I think one of the speakers mentioned that the regime's days are kind of counted now. So I think this is the general impression of all those Belarusians who are now on the streets, and I can just confirm that. I get photos and videos from my friends, also from my parents, from my hometown, and my parents have never been, any kind of politically engaged. They just observe what is happening on the streets, and they cannot believe that. So it's really, this feeling of the unity of nation, that the nation has united, that the people feel that this solidarity is really throughout the whole country, which never happened, I guess, in Belarus before. But I think we have to be a bit cautious when we, pick up this optimism and try to start to think that the regime is already done. So, well, here are quite a number of important points. When we look at the president, I mean, what the president is saying to people, his speech yesterday, and especially his speech today in front of the people, we understand that the president is not legitimate in society anymore. It's quite clear. So we don't need any official results from the Central Electoral Commission to understand that the vast majority of people really did not vote for him. But what frightened me a bit, that in his speech yesterday, he was really, I had an impression that he really didn't understand how the society has changed, how the Belarusian society has changed in the last couple of months, or maybe in the last half a year, that he really does not realize that he didn't have this support. So that is actually the reason why he tried, to go to the workers of state-owned enterprise in Minsk, which I actually thought after the speech of yesterday and after these hundreds of thousands of people nationwide would never happen, because he should have understood yesterday that the people are not supporting him. But he did it today. It was really surprising for me, I have to say. And I mean, the things that we heard from the president, they're quite scary. So he's saying something like, you should kill me if you want to have new elections. Or he's saying something like, what was the second quote? I already forgot that. I think that was from yesterday, that, well, he cannot imagine any Belarus after him, or something like, if he goes, Belarus will not exist as a state. And there are quite a lot of jokes about it in social networks, but politically, it's not funny. I mean, I have the feeling that he really believes in that. And I don't now have any feeling that he is ready to, for any kinds of negotiations or any new ways to calm the people down. I mean, he didn't use the possibility to apologize. He never apologized till now. He didn't use the possibility to show for the last time maybe that he's a strong leader, that he understands the problems, and he didn't even try to unite people. So the only message that we heard, those who support me are the right Belarusians, and all the others I know, financed from the West, and they're just youngsters and they do not understand. So today he saw that these people are not youngsters. He saw it for the first time because he was at the plant. So he saw that it's not, some internet jokes. It is reality now for him. And what reaction do we see? We see these same statements, you should kill me so that you have new elections. So it's really not funny for me when I try to realize what it could mean, you know, for the upcoming weeks in Belarus. And this is one important point. The next one, we've also been observing, you know, these negotiations or tries of attempts of people to negotiate with the local authorities. Where I also kind of had the feeling that the local authorities also do not understand what is happening. I mean, they're quite surprised, they look helpless, they don't understand why people are so angry. And so far, maybe with the exception of Brest, maybe I'm not informed that good because I don't have a lot of time for news, but with the exception of Brest, where people managed, you know, to make the local authorities free detained people in Brest, it has not become a tendency till now. So we do not really know if it will, you know, lead to some chain reaction, which I think people are expecting. So people are expecting who would be the first mayor on this level, on this local level, you know, to change the site and come to people. And I could imagine that could bring to some chain reaction, but we still also have negative examples, like, for example, with Mr. Latushka, who is director of Kopalovsky Theater and, well, used to be, because he was fired, because he openly supported opposition, and he used to be also the Minister of Culture. So instead of seeing some chain of other people, we saw that he was fired, and it is still, you know, this, maybe the last ones, but they are still these old signals coming from the system that it should be punished. And once again, to those, the people who are trying to self-organize themselves on the level of working collective, how do you call that in English? Collectives? Like people, working people in the plants. And it's very interesting because they're not that organized nationwide. They just decide on spot on every factory, on every plant what to do. And that makes it difficult for the authorities to control. But at the same time, I see that their demands are quite different. Well, some of them just want to resign, Lukashenko to resign and new elections. Some of them want the whole parliament and government and whatever, I think also the Central Election Commission to resign. And if they do not manage, you know, to send one message on all levels, I think that the authorities could use, you know, this time and to wait till people, you know, if it's 1, 2, 3 weeks of strikes, it would destroy Belarusian economy, and it would make it impossible for people to go further, because, you know, Belarusian people are not rich, they are poor. So there are two possibilities. If it lasts for 2, 3 weeks and nothing happening, people either would come back to work because they need money, or they could radicalize themselves, and this protest would not be that peaceful anymore because people don't have money, they want to eat, and they are not happy with the political situation. And this could actually bring us to this horrible scenario that Lukashenko is talking about. I mean, he's talking the whole time about these 90s, the economic health, the political health, and I'm really afraid that it's actually one of his aims to bring the state really to this kind of chaos, that people would understand that it was the wrong decision, to mob him and to be against him. And there comes the Russian factor, of course. I mean, there would be a good possibility somehow to use this situation to rescue the economy or whatever in Belarus. Another scenario is, of course, that well, maybe not another scenario, but we still have elites, right? We still do not know what is happening within them. Maybe there are already some negotiations, but we still don't know that. It is, of course, possible that those people within the elites, those who do not want to leave the country, because most of them maybe would stay in Belarus, in the new Belarus, of course, they would understand that 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks of strikes, it is not good for the economy of the country they want to live in. So the more worse it is for economy, the higher the possibility it is that the pressure would come from the elites. I think the pressure of society is already enormous. So people have done what they really could have done. I think that, well, this factor of pressure coming from the elites, if there will be any pressure in the upcoming weeks, will be also important to observe. And the last maybe just the last chapter, I'm sorry. I just wanted to stress the idea of Mrs. Beck, of this geopolitical dimension. It's really extremely important. I get quite a lot of question about it, or whether it is East or pro-Eastern or pro-Western movement. It's really not, either not. And it's really important to understand also when we're talking about this possible public committee that Belarusians are now trying to build. There are already some people who joined this committee. I think it's really important not to try to make, not to make the impression that this committee is somehow influenced by the European Union. I think it's a good idea about OSCE, but I think it should be limited by OSCE, because it will start with such institutions as the European Union. Then of course we could have this aggressive reaction from Russia, because they would have the feeling that the whole negotiation process, when it comes to negotiation, is being influenced from the West, and that exactly what it is not now, because it's a really grassroots initiative coming from Belarusian society, and it's really important to keep it in mind. Thank you.
All right, let's wrap up here and say goodbye to everybody. Thank you, Olga, also for your comments. Baka.
Thank you. Bye-bye.